What's the most inappropriate thing you've witnessed at a funeral? My father's funeral. After the service and the reception after, my mother, brother, and sister headed back to our family home. A bunch of my father's siblings and their family were also staying at the house with us. We got home a few minutes before everyone else. I was sitting at a table in the living room when I could see their cars come down the driveway. They all got out and were hugging and seemingly congratulating each other. The reception after the service was beautifully put together and was actually a fun time. A fitting send-off for my father. So I assumed they were still just having fun from that. Until they came inside. They all came in together very quickly and quietly. They came up to me and my older brother sitting at the table and kind of crowded around like a bunch of kids about to see if they could have a cookie before dinner. My Aunt Barbara smugly stood at the front and asked, "So when are we going to be doing the reading of the will to see what was left to us all?" My brother and I just looked at each other for a few moments before we turned to them to say, "Are you kidding? Reading of the will? Like a soap opera? There is no reading of the will. Everything that belonged to my father now just belongs to my mother." The look of defeat, but not shame, was disgustingly transparent. They were supposed to stay another few nights. They packed up and left that afternoon. My own kids. Boys ages 10 and 8. At their great-grandfather's wake, they got a chair and moved it to the casket and started making his mouth into smiley face. Laughing the whole time. When me and their grandfather, my father-in-law, saw it, I immediately pulled them away and told them they shouldn't do that. Grandpa laughed and said it's fine. He would have really loved that they did that. We later found out that the great-grandfather had asked the funeral home ahead of time to put a sign in his hand that said thanks for coming, but they refused. My grandfather passed away a few months ago. He was a World War II veteran and a pastor, so therefore didn't make a lot of money and died basically penniless. When he was in his 40s, he married a woman and helped her raise her 4 teenage children and had my father around the same time. The 4 children were always awful people and cut off contact with him and my father 20 plus years ago. At his funeral, all 4 stepkids, their spouses, and all of their children showed up, walked up to my dad in one big group, and demanded he hand over their inheritance. My dad said, "What inheritance? Not only did grandpa die with $12 to his name, he also never formally adopted these children and hadn't spoken to them in 20 years. They then threatened to sue my dad and left the funeral before it officially began. A few weeks ago, my dad was served with an official lawsuit from some billboard attorney they scraped up the funds for. Luckily, my fiance is a much more successful attorney and is on his way to getting the case dismissed with prejudice and his attorney's fees paid." At my grandpa's funeral in 2006, a random drunk woman that no one in our family knew stumbled in and started singing show tunes, then crying till she was escorted out. The funeral home putting a random guy in my grandfather's casket, suit, glasses, and wedding band, while then admitting that they had misplaced my grandfather was fairly inappropriate for a funeral. An estranged uncle driving past my grandmother's funeral playing Another One Bites the Dust. My step-grandmother died a few months before the Borat movie came out, so everyone was in full-blown Borat mode. Someone's phone went off, and their ringtone was "Throw the Jew down the well." Edit, she, as well as most of the people attending the funeral, were all Jewish. Only somewhat inappropriate, but certainly the funniest thing. It was a funeral for an uncle I was very distantly related to, and this is happening in Greece, in the summer. The church is very full and incredibly hot. You can smell the sweat, there's incense, the air isn't circulating, and the priest is just going on and on. I don't think I can describe how grim the situation was. Not totally unexpectedly therefore, just as the priest is getting to something particularly emotional, a man, an old colleague standing near the back, faints. He's completely out. Now, this guy was very tall and rather broad, so not only was it a miracle that he didn't take out the 2 tiny old ladies right in front of him, he was also really difficult to carry outside to get some air. Somebody has the brilliant idea that the palperas, those people who carry the casket, should carry him. since they've practiced it and are reasonably strong. So everybody squeezes a bit tighter. Nobody wants to leave the church. Things just got interesting to let them through. They picked him up, 3 on one side and 3 on the other, i.e., more or less as they would the casket, and start carrying him towards the door. Suddenly, this guy wakes up, turns his head several times, grasps what's going on, and who's carrying him faster than anybody can respond, and immediately starts yelling, "I'm alive. I'm alive. I'm alive." At which point, one of the palbras laughs so hard that he drops what was thankfully a leg, and the others struggle to put him down in what is now a church absolutely exploding with laughter. The whole situation went on for a good 15 minutes, in which this guy walked outside and the priest tried to resume the service, but there absolutely continued to be giggles throughout. I, being a teenager at the time, also couldn't possibly hold it back every time I thought of this guy yelling he's alive. Nobody was even particularly upset, because the uncle we were burying was always laughing and joking around, so it somehow felt appropriate that we had a great laugh at his funeral. At my cousin's funeral, one of my relatives literally tried jumping in the casket with him. Really traumatizing experience, I might add. At my grandma's funeral, there was a woman that had a really bad relationship with my grandma, but one of my aunts invited her to the funeral. She started receiving people as if she was a family member and tried to put herself at the center of everything. Not a funeral, but my grandmother was on her deathbed. She was going in and out of consciousness. My asshole father and his asshole sister start arguing over who will get her wedding ring. Not for sentimental value, but because they wanted to sell it. Anyway, to make a long story short, they took the ring off, and their mother came out of consciousness, and the first thing she said was, "Where is my ring?" Fucking scumbags. The priest repeatedly referred to my grandmother by the wrong name. After the 4th or 5th time, my aunt got up and then quietly told him the correct name. My grandmother had attended church weekly for decades. There was no reason for the priest to not know his parishioner. Needless to say, we did not pay his fee. My cousin's funeral, he was 27 years old and killed in a single car crash after he hit a slippery patch on the road and smashed into a concrete wall. At his funeral, all of his brothers, sisters, and parents sat on the front row at his graveside service. Then, lo and behold, my cousin's ex-girlfriend of over a year shows up and immediately inserts herself onto the front row next to his sisters, and proceeds to scream, cry, scream, wail, and throw herself on the ground periodically throughout the service. All of the family just gave her awkward stares, with no one wanted to address her inappropriate behavior. I had never seen that type of attention-demanding drama queen antics before, or since. At an open casket wake, a friend of the deceased attempted to give her a drink of single malt whiskey. She ended up being forcibly removed as she wouldn't stop, and spilled a lot of the alcohol in the casket. It was as horrible and inappropriate as it was heartbreaking for everyone. Someone trying to quietly open a can while they were doing the closing prayer. My ex came back from her grandfather's funeral. I had to work with family reunion pictures of herself, her siblings, and her parents posing next to the open casket. When I casually commented that I thought it was a little off, she explained that they did so because grandma otherwise wouldn't believe he died. Picture, if you will, 2 elderly women in a funeral squaring up as people are still crying from the ceremony. At the lunch after my grandpa's funeral, his daughter from a previous marriage, Dee, who no one had seen in years, showed up. Dee had been writing bad checks all the way to the state prison and had definitely had some unresolved beef with my family when she got out. The last time my mom saw her was when she was 11 and Dee left her infant daughter for my mom to babysit and never came back. Fast forward to the funeral, Dee is acting like it's a family reunion, but no one is having it, since she's basically screwed everyone in the room in one way or another. My grandpa's last girlfriend, a legally blind woman, tried to physically fight her until others stepped in. You have been visited by the Sand Doggo. Like and subscribe to turn your rough day into a rough day.